Render. Hi guys, the render filter group is one of the most spectacular. With these filters, you can create realistic trees, fire, clouds, and fog. If you work in a fantasy style, then you can't work without these filters at all, but they can also be used in other stylistics. Let's take a look. Let's start by creating a realistic fire. To do this, we need to create a new layer. Then we go to the filter, Render, and select Flames. And Photoshop asks us to create a path, because we haven't created a path. Let's create it. To do this, we will need the pen tool. It should be in path mode. And now we'll create this path. For example, I would like to place flames somewhere in this place, and I would probably create a path like this. After that, I go to the filter, Render, and select Flames. And in this case, everything is already working out for me. In the window, you can choose the fire option, one flame tongue, multiple flame tongues. I think that you can look at all this yourself and choose the option that will be most suitable for you. I will stop on this option. We can also adjust our flame here. For example, we can change its width. We can also choose the color of the flame. But I think it's better to just adjust its color using other settings later. Although, we could choose. And for example, we could have a blue flame. I'm not going to do that now. In the advanced settings, we can also work with the flame and see how it will change when the settings are changed. Look, you can make it brighter or conversely, more transparent, and you can create more complex lines. But it seems to me, yes, even so, maybe it will be a little more interesting if we do something like this. The flame can be aligned along the bottom edge, and you can choose a style. We have now the normal one. There is also a violent. There is also a low flame. I will leave the normal, and the shape of the flames can also be chosen. I'm not going through all the options now. You can do it all yourself. You can also change the order, so you can create a flame to your taste. I agree. The flame is ready, and now I press delete in order to remove the path which we created. It was an auxiliary one, and we won't need it anymore. And let's work with our flame directly in this picture. Of course, we can apply a free transform and, for example, increase or decrease our flame. We can even change its shape. If we click the right mouse button and select deformation, then we'll have the opportunity to arrange the flames as we want. Well, let's say I will have something like this. Enter. Flame. But now we can already adjust the shades of our flame with the help of adjustment layers. Let's try to apply brightness and contrast. At the same time, the brightness of the whole picture changes. If we want to apply this action only to the flame, I will remind you that we can press this button here. And in this case, the actions that we apply on the adjustment layer will be applied only to the layer below. So let's say I will probably stop at these values and apply another adjustment layer, which is called hue and saturation. Here you can experiment and apply different types of adjustment layers. Apply only to the flame. You can increase the saturation and add it, for example, more orange shades, probably like this. I think it will be good. And you can also apply vibrance. Well, that's probably how I will leave it. By the way, you can create many flames, make a big bonfire, duplicate the flame several times, and just change its shape with the help of transformation, leaving the adjustment layer on top so that the flames are identical in color and tone. I think it would be nice to add some fog to this image, and for this we will create a new layer and apply the render filter to it, which is called clouds. And look, these clouds turn out in the colors that we have. And if we change the blending mode, for example, to the screen, then we'll see how they look. These are the clouds that are almost invisible at the bottom of the image. In principle, clouds can be left like this, but you can try to create other options in a different color scheme. For example, I'll now press the D key to set the black to white colors. I will create another layer. I'll apply the cloud filter. Look, my clouds have turned black and white. I will apply the screen blending mode to make the black color invisible, and I will get clouds like this. In order for my clouds to be larger, I will press Ctrl+T and just simply increase it, achieving the size that I need. For example, I want a large size. So click Enter or use this button. And now we can firstly reduce the opacity and secondly use the layer mask. And on it we can remove the clouds in those places where we don't need them. For example, from above, it seems to me that were quite beautiful clouds that were originally there, and from below we will leave a little bit of this kind of fog around the edges, probably like this, and here on top maybe even a little bit. Here is such an interesting composition we have. Let's go ahead and look at the rest of the filters. We have already considered the flare filter, but I would like to focus on it again now, because we applied this filter directly to the layer we were working on, which doesn't allow us to edit it if necessary. In order to get such an opportunity, we need to create a clean layer. Fill it with black. Press Alt plus Backspace and go to the filter and select the flare. As you remember, we have different flares here that we can choose and increase or decrease their size. Let's choose this flare. It has changed. I didn't even choose the place of its position. And we switch blending mode to the screen, and we can move our flare quite calmly as we want. But since we had a strong flare and the image around it stopped being completely black, these edges were formed. For example, I will have a flare located somewhere here. And to remove these edges, we just take an ordinary black brush and just paint over the place that we would like to have transparent. That's how I will do it here. In general, the theme of flare is quite well manifested in Photoshop, and there is such an interesting effect called bokeh. It can be created with a maximum filter, but it is from another group. We'll also look at it today. In order to create bokeh, these are such luminous, bright highlights, usually round in shape. We will need image like this. In general, an image with some glowing objects on a dark background is suitable for these purposes. We'll copy this image, Ctrl plus C. Let's move on to our cosmic picture, insert it, and now we'll apply a filter that can be partly attributed to the blur filter, because it blurs the light parts of the image. It is in the other group, and it is called the maximum. I won't tell you about the maximum filter, but its effect is completely the opposite. The area of the dark parts of the image increases and blurs. So, the maximum. Here we have the option of roundness and squareness. When choosing a rectangular, we'll get a more angular area, and with roundness, the areas are rounder. Let's assume that we have a suitable value, and click OK. Perhaps it was possible to make more blurry balls. And now we are applying this screen to this layer, in order to make the dark areas transparent. And for example, we can place our highlights somewhere below. Free transform. Here they turned out to be so bright. Reduce the opacity, of course, because it turns out the reactive layer. If desired, you can slightly adjust them into 3 layers, erase some part. I made some more adjustments and set the opacity of the layer with a bokeh of 17%. You may want to make the image a little juicier, and to do this, apply an adjustment layer called Vibrance, or try experimenting with some other adjustment layers. That is, we can edit entities, making the picture even more fantastic. You can remove a little saturation. Well, in general, do as you want, like that. You can do it the whole day. For example, you can also work on the mask. After all, we don't want this effect to be extra. If desired, you can also edit curves and make, for example, this one, or vice versa. In general, I am waiting for your creative solutions on this matter. As usual, we will recall the original version. And let's take another look at what we did with it. Of course, you cannot limit yourself to the effects that I applied. And perhaps you want to edit some more filters, or make a collage by adding some new elements to this image, just like with the previous one. Today's homework is to create such a fantastic landscape, and also adding fog and fire to this image. I look forward to seeing your work. It seems to me that they may be particularly interesting in this case. Filters of the render group allow you to create lighting effects, which are indistinguishable for effects that occur naturally, as well as create a huge number of realistic trees. Let's try to do it. We will start with the trees. To do this, we need to go to the filter, render, and select trees, or rather a tree. Now we can choose any tree from the 34 trees that are presented here by the software. There are a variety of trees. There are even such exotic trees as, for example, sakura flowers, or for example, bamboo. Moreover, you can customize all these trees depending on what you want to get. And each time you can get a completely different tree, even if there are trees of the same breed. For example, let's take an oak tree. Firstly, we can adjust the tree, focusing on our image. For example, the direction of light. See where the light falls from in our image. Basically, we'll place this tree and arrange the direction of light so that the tree is illuminated as much as we have illuminated other elements of our collage. For example, I have now set a sufficiently high value for the direction of light, and my tree began to be illuminated on the right. And if I set a lower value, then my tree will be illuminated on the left. In addition, we can adjust the amount of leaves. Thus, our tree can be both summer and winter. For example, I can reduce the number of leaves, or even completely reduce it, and we'll get a tree like this, which is suitable for some kind of illustration of late autumn. You can even completely remove them to zero. Here is such a tree. Maybe you remember I used images with these trees as a screensaver for the last lesson. It was an oak, but without leaves. Let's see how the size of the leaves can change. That is, we can set large leaves, and we'll have such a magnificent oak. Or we can make the leaves small, and then the oak will look like this. I'll increase the size of the leaves, so that it's somehow prettier. We can also change the height and, for example, the thickness of the branches. And then the software itself will create some kind of tree shape, selected randomly. We can also increase the arrangement and see how the tree changes in this case. That is, we can create an entire oak grove, and all the oaks will be completely different. We can move on to advanced settings. And here we can, for example, change the color of the leaves, making an autumn oak. Well, for example, I will choose some color like this. Here we can also move the slider. Let's say this. We can also change the color of the branches. Now it has such a shade. But if our composition requires a different one, then of course we can also change it, as well as the color of the leaves. You can also work with a shadow, but I still won't do it. And change the contrast of the leaves, make the branches look like a vector drawing, and choose leaves rotation block, which will lead to such a decorative effect, as if all the leaves are in the frontal plane. It seems to me that this is generally very exciting. Maybe you can make a very beautiful picture using these trees that appeared in Photoshop. But we'll get back to the basics. And now I will choose a tree suitable for our composition. I think it will be willow. Here is such a willow. It's not quite beautiful, because the settings that were used for the oak were applied to it. So we'll do the rest. In order to return the color that we had before in advanced settings, let's try firstly to increase probably the amount of leaves. I will leave the direction of the light as it is, because I would like to put it here. And here it would be just right, if the light falls the way it falls. I will increase the size of the leaves, making it much more sprawling, and change the height of the branches. That's how I will probably make it, so that it leans a little towards the pond. And click OK. Here my wonderful willow appeared. As you can see, this tree is quite stylized. That is, it's not absolutely realistic. Therefore, such trees are more suitable for some kind of fantasy collages. And also, for example, they can be perfectly used to create sketches of landscape design, or finalize some architectural projects. Let's reduce our tree. This is where it will grow. I will make it a little smaller. After all, I didn't get the lighting exactly the way I would like. Therefore, I will now create a new clean layer. Using the eyedropper, I will take a sample of the color of the dark parts of the leaves and use a soft brush on the new layer, which I pre-switch to the multiply mode. I will edit a little shadows. In the lower part of the tree probably, the opacity of the layer can be made smaller. And now I will edit a little shade, so that the willow matches the lightning of other trees. Well, perhaps we'll leave it like that. In general, you can also make the trunk darker. To do this, you can also take a sample from somewhere. We added a dark color on the trunk. By the way, you can also add shadows a little bit here. Directly draw dark ones with a brush, because of course there must be some kind of shadow under the tree. And I will take another sample from the reflection and add it a little bit here. Of course, it would be possible to make a morph reflection here, but we will not deal with this now. I think that in principle, if you wish, you can make a realistic reflection from this willow, and we will now consider another version of the cloud filter, but a little different. To do this, we need to create a composite layer, and we will create clouds on this layer. Let's go to the render filter and select different clouds. Look at what happens in this case. That is, clouds are created taking into account the image itself. And of course, you can now reduce the opacity. For example, edit a mask and remove these clouds, leaving the most illuminated central part of the image. We created these clouds in order to give our image more drama. Take a look at what we had and what we got as a result of adding clouds. And to make this effect even more expressive, we can edit various lighting sources. We can edit them directly to this image, or we can also try to use the color lookup adjustment layer and create the effect of night. To do this, let's choose a color lookup. Here, among the samples that we have, there are, for example, such options as foggy night, and we have such an effect of the night. Or, for example, we have an effect called moonlight. Or, for example, we can use, here is another option. You can reduce the opacity. Here, for example, the effect will be like this. If you apply soft light mode to this layer, that's how our image were tinted a little. And now we'll definitely move on to light sources. Let's create another composite layer. Now we'll go to the render filter and select lightning effects. This is a very interesting thing. Take a look right away. By default I got such an interesting light source. Let's see how it works. Firstly, we have presets, among which you can choose different types of lightning. Well, here for example, a second o'clock spotlight. Across here, a flashlight. By the way, it can be quite interesting, because sometimes when you need to create, for example, a color from a candle, it can look very good. The source of the color is RGB. Triple spotlight. You can choose what you like best, and I choose a soft light bubble in the end. You can take the center and transfer your light source to the place you need, and right here you can move the slider, decrease or increase the intensity of this illumination. You can also, of course, work with the size, and so you can decrease or increase your light source. I will have a light from here. You can adjust the exposure. This is the same thing that I have just done directly on the circles here. You can edit gloss, metal, but this in general will not be very clearly visible in this image. But gloss implies that there are many surfaces that reflect light, well, next to your lighting object. And when you edit this gloss parameter, the illumination in the environment that you have created will be as realistic as possible. Metal also gives something of this kind, but to be honest, it is difficult to assess it purely visually, and the environment parameter allows you to maximally adapt the light source you created to the illumination that is in your picture. Look at this, I'm edited now, and what I get as a result? Well, there is a real light here. I think it's not worth it. You can also edit a texture. Well, it's not very pretty actually. You can try it. Maybe we get something interesting. The texture works relative to the channels, and its height can be added. And it turns out such a thing. It seems to me that it's not worth adding texture here at all. We have a spotlight, which we get when we connect this button. You can also edit, for example, another point of light source. I pressed it again. I have another one that I can place somewhere else too. To delete the source, I press the right mouse button or select Delete Object, and it is deleted. It was our spotlight. Oh, I accidentally created it again. Delete it again. And you can create, for example, directional light. We choose, and we have added such a light source. Look, we have two of them now, and we can turn off and turn on, like this. One light source. The second light source. This one we can also somehow move. We can increase or decrease, and we can also create a source of infinite light. In this case, such a pin turns out, which we can transfer somewhere even beyond our image. It turns out that everything will be like this, and I'm now turning a leaf some kind of very far away light, but I will turn it off. It seems to me that this is not required in our picture. Delete an object. Let's leave this too, and let's take another look at the lighting effects. First, we can change the color. Now the color is white, but you can make it, for example, yellow. So, look at how my picture was tinted when I changed the color. For comparison, for example, pink color. Maybe even it would be nice to actually edit pink color, or some kind of orange. Well, you see which one you like more. Let's say I agree and click OK. Now I have this color. I can, of course, change its intensity more or less. This can be done like that. It seems to me that it's worth to stretch all this a little. Then I have a very dark picture. Let's do this. And after we apply it all, we pick it up. We can compare the source code here. Compare the result and click OK. By the way, yes, it could all be on a smart object. In this fairy tale world, evening has come. Because before that, the picture looked like this. It was probably a little earlier than that. And we have the sunset hours now. Let's take a closer look at the resulting image. I have another option with a different lighting. In general, each time it may turn out differently, depending on which settings we choose. And of course, this will be your homework. But here you can not only put a willow tree, but maybe edit some other trees, and maybe you want to edit some more characters or objects, or apply some other effects. Please show your creativity as much as possible. I will be only too happy to see what you get as a result. After all, now you already know a lot about Photoshop, and the main thing now is to start using it all, because without using it, you will forget everything very soon. Therefore, try to use the most of your knowledge. In the render filter group, there is another very interesting filter called fibers. For example, you can even create an imitation of water, as in this image, as well as many other effects. Let's take a closer look at this filter. Suppose we want to change the proportions of this image and edit a space at the bottom of this image, so that it fits seamlessly into the entire composition. Let's unlock the layer and change the proportions of the image. You still remember how to do it, I hope. Go into the image, choose the size of the canvas, and I would like to edit 30% the image area at the bottom. I set 130%, since I will only change in height. And I have added the square. I will create another clean layer. I will take a color sample. I will fill a new layer with this color. Let's say this color is fine. It's a little bit different, but I think it will suit us. And now, in order for us to have some interesting texture, we will just use a filter called fibers. But just as in the case of clouds, we will need two colors in order to create these fibers. Since they will be created from the colors that we have chosen as the main ones, I will take some light color and the darker color. I will edit another new layer. Next, the filter render fibers. Look, we have such a texture, which is fibers. You can adjust it and make these fibers thicker, or conversely, almost invisible at all. Suppose we stop at such fibers. By the way, you can choose the randomize, and then the fibers will be created randomly. Let's change the location. Free transform, flip 90 degrees, and I will lower it down a little. I will stretch it. I will put it about here. Lower opacity, change the blending mode, I will edit a layer mask. Fill in such a way as to make the transition less noticeable. It turns out something similar to water, by the way. Quite by accident, although I didn't set this task for myself this time. Next, go to the filter gallery, and I choose this one to give this texture settings. I have 23 and 4, and as a result I got something similar to the earth. I will reduce the opacity a little more to make this transition more natural. In general, I want to say right away that filters are extremely rarely used alone, and it can be quite difficult to get some really interesting effect with a single filter. As a rule, a combination of different filters is used. I have prepared a clean layer in advance, on which we will now apply the effects of fibers. But this time I will need fibers that will be in the range of this photo, so I choose this color. Press Alt. Let's move on to the fibers. Render fibers. And this time I want to take fibers that are not thick at all. Let's say these. We change the blending mode, stretch the texture in this way. Let's reduce the opacity. And now I will edit a layer mask. I will remove the excess texture on this layer as well. Like that. Let's create a composite layer and apply an oil painting filter to it. Filter styles and choose oil painting. This is a very interesting filter, with which you can achieve imitation of classical painting. And now we will try to use it. So we apply, a window opens. Let's turn on the preview. You can immediately see how the texture has changed. These settings are quite easy, and you can change them depending on your preferences. I'm satisfied with the settings. I will focus on such parameters. I promised that we would use several filters, and now we will do it. To do this, we need to make a copy of the background layer, put it at the very top, and we will use another interesting filter called edge detection, as a result of which we get this image. We change the blending mode at our discretion. We probably prefer multiply and reduce the opacity a little bit. Look, it added silhouette to our image. You can try to edit a mask and to clean up this image a little in some places where we don't want it to be partly visible. And if we want to enhance the effect, we can duplicate the layer several times. Well, now, for more expressiveness, I suggest adding lightning effects. After all, you now know how to do it. And I'll create another composite layer. And we'll go into Filter, Render, Lightning Effects. Let's focus on the face. So I clicked on the edge, and now I'm pushing the boundaries of our lightning in order to increase the area of its impact. I'll add the ambience parameter for greater softness. OK, and now we can simply reduce the opacity, so that this effect is not excessive. You can change the blending mode, for example, to soft light. Then it will be a little more interesting. And this is the result we already have now. And now let's look at the last filter from the render group. It allows you to create frames. It is called the picture frame. This filter is intuitive. I won't talk about it for too long. You can choose from a large number of options, some type of frame that you like. And so I settled on this one, number 42. You can choose its color, somehow change it, for example. So change the size. Let me have this narrow frame. Actually, I don't think that a frame is needed for this work. But I want to show you how this filter works. If you took such an option, then you would also have the settings available at the bottom. And so we apply it. So this is our frame. We press Ctrl+T and Shift in order to fit it to our size. I am putting up a frame. I think it's worth making the frame a little darker. So I'll apply a hue and saturation layer specifically to this layer. Don't forget to click on this button. I'll make the frame darker. Let it be something like that. And I think it would be possible to add a styled layer to our frame in order to add a shadow to it. And now I have such settings that I have chosen beforehand. That's it. If you think that the frame is not needed here, then you can disable it. But I think it would be nice if you still got acquainted with this filter. I hope that you have understood how you can create such a frame if necessary. And I will leave the image like this. With the help of filters, you can create a huge number of very different effects. Today we have two homework assignments. The first task will be to edit space, and the second task will be to edit photos in vintage style. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time.